Chair, it looks like we have the YouTube running. If I could just do my brief introduction, just to let everyone know who we have on the call. Thank you very much. So welcome everyone to tonight's Planning Committee meeting. We currently have 4 members of the Planning Committee present with us, as Councillor Kiley has sent his regrets, so we do still have quorum. Councillor Chappelle and Councillor Osterhoff are also joining us this evening. We have from staff, Tim Park, Director of Planning Services, James Barr, Manager Development Approvals, Janice Grant, Senior Planner, Mike Slaggy, Planner, and Blair Johnson is our meeting host for this evening. I am Elizabeth Fawcett as Committee Clerk. We currently have 6 applicants and agents as part of the meeting and 7 members of the public who are watching from the gallery.
Great. Thank you very much. I'll call this public meeting to order, and I will be reading the notice of collection. Personal information collected as a result of this public meeting and process is collected under the authority of the Planning Act and will be used to assist in making a decision on this matter. All names, addresses, opinions, and comments may be collected and may form part of the minutes, which will be available to the public. Questions regarding this collection should be forwarded to the Director of Planning Services. The purpose of public meetings is to present planning applications in a public forum and to give the public an opportunity to make representations in respect of the proposal as required by the Planning Act. Following presentations by the applicant, the meeting will be open to the public for comments and questions. Persons speaking at the meeting are requested to give their name and address for recording in the minutes. Additionally, interested members of the public can email the committee clerk or the assigned planner if they wish to be notified regarding a particular application. No decisions are made at public meeting concerning applications. An exception to this rule is combined reports, which consolidates the public meeting and comprehensive reports. These applications are deemed by staff as straightforward and routine, and we do have one such decision tonight. Public meeting reports are provided to inform the public of relevant information. After the meeting tonight, staff will be considering the comments made by the public in their further review of the applications. When this review is completed, a comprehensive report will be prepared, making a recommendation for action to this committee. The recommendation is typically to approve with conditions or to deny. This committee then makes a recommendation on the applications to City Council, who has the final say on the applications. Following council decision, notice will be circulated in accordance with the Planning Act. If a person or public body would otherwise have an ability to appeal the decision of the Council of the Corporation of the City of Kingston in the Ontario Land Tribunal. I'm sorry, I've lost my place. I'll start that again. Following council decision, notice will be circulated in accordance with the Planning Act. If a person or public body would otherwise have an ability to appeal the decision of the Council of the Corporation of the City of Kingston to the Ontario Land Tribunal, but that person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the City of Kingston before the bylaw is passed, that person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision. I apologize for my little stumble there. All of the members of this committee were at a council meeting on Tuesday that went to almost 1 o'clock. So bear with us, if you would. So our first and only public meeting tonight is regarding 235 Frontenac Street. And that is before us. So we will begin that public meeting, and I think I see Janice on the screen. I believe this is your cue.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair, and through you. So the applicant will be presenting on the public meeting portion tonight, but I will just let the committee know about notices that have gone out. So notice was mailed out and posted on site in accordance with the requirements of the Planning Act. Courtesy notices were also placed in the Kingston Link Standard. No phone calls or correspondence had been received on this application, with the exception of an email with a number of questions, which was sent today by a representative of the Sydenham District Association. And these have been provided in the addendum tonight for committee for their information. We as staff have responded to the representative, and they've indicated their satisfaction with that response moving forward, but we wanted to make sure that the committee was aware of those questions. And we're happy to speak to clarifying or responding to any of those questions tonight. The applicant's planner has also had a chance to review those questions and can touch on them in her presentation as well. So I will hand it over to Jen now.
Great, the floor is yours, Jen.
Thank you very much, and through you. My name is Jennifer Wood. I'm a planner with Bo10 Planning and Design. And thank you very much for having me. This is a public meeting for a proposed official plan and zoning bylaw amendment for the property at 235 Frontenac Street. This is the site of the former Kingston Collegiate and Vocational Institute, so KCVI. In 2020, the Limestone District School Board declared the property surplus to their needs, at which point it closed as a public school. And then the property was put up for sale and offered to a list of preferred organizations, including Queen's University. Queen's has since entered into an agreement with the school board to purchase the property, which is conditional on the approval of the planning applications before you this evening, which would effectively permit the use of the existing school building for university uses. Next slide, please. A very brief background on the property itself. It's roughly 1.4 hectares in size, and it has frontage on Frontenac Street, Earl Street, and Alfred Street. It's directly adjacent to the Queen's University main campus. Queen's owned properties, you can see, are highlighted on this slide in this aerial in purple. So the university flanks this property to the south. In the east, there is a university owned property across the street to the north on Earl as well. So again, this is a former public school, KCVI. The existing building is a brick structure. It ranges in height from 1 to 3.5 stories. The building does have cultural heritage value and significance, and as such is designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. The building is oriented towards Frontenac Street, so that image is taken from Frontenac. It has a rear surface parking lot that can be accessed from both Frontenac and Alfred Streets. Next slide, please. The purpose of the applications before you this evening is to allow Queen's University, who has an agreement to purchase the property, to repurpose the interior of the former school building to accommodate post-secondary institutional uses. So aside from general maintenance and repairs, the current proposal will not result in any exterior changes to the building, no increases in height or footprint. There are no proposed facade changes at this time. The exact university uses that will utilize this space is not yet known. That will start to be made more clear if and when the purchase goes through. But at this time, the proposed interior use is not intended to accommodate any kind of student residence use. Next slide, please. The property is designated residential in the official plan. The designation permits both primary and secondary schools, but does not permit post-secondary institutions or schools. So an official plan amendment is proposed that would redesignate the property from institutional, or from residential rather, to institutional. This is the designation that applies to the rest of Queens and permits the use. Next slide, please. The property is currently zoned 1 family and 2 family dwelling A. So similar to the OP designation, the residential zoning also permits public schools, but does not permit post-secondary schools. So a rezoning is also required and proposed. Next slide, please. So in terms of the proposed rezoning, we're proposing the special education and medical uses E-zone. The E-zone is what applies to the rest of Queen's main campus. We're proposing a site-specific zone as well as a holding symbol. So the site-specific E-zone will include a special provision that essentially recognizes the location of the existing school building, since it is so old that it's considered legal non-complying and doesn't meet a number of the zoning provisions. So the site-specific zone would recognize that situation and basically say that if any future development is proposed beyond what exists, it is required to comply with the E-zone requirements. The holding symbol is associated with controlling any future residential use on the site. So as long as that holding symbol applies, residential uses are not permitted in any form, whether that's a market dwelling unit, a rooming house, a boarding house, a habitation unit, which is essentially what we call student residences. If any of these residential uses are proposed in the future, an application for an H-lift or a hold lift would be required to be submitted and also approved by council, and would only be considered if A, it's demonstrated there's sufficient servicing capacity to accommodate a residential use in whatever density is proposed at that time, and also to require site plan control approval. As I noted, at this time, this building is not anticipated to be converted for any residential use for the university, but it's just sort of an extra measure to account for the known servicing constraints in this area, if and when one day a residential use were to be contemplated. Next slide, please. So just to wrap up, it's my opinion that the proposed official plan and zoning bylaw amendments are appropriate. The applications are consistent with the provincial policy statement, as well as the general intent of the official plan. These applications will facilitate the continued use of this as a heritage building for educational purposes, and really represents a logical and compatible extension of the Queen's University main campus. Next slide, please. That concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to respond to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will turn to the public and give them an opportunity to ask questions, and then we'll come back to the committee afterwards. I will let the clerk take over the reins here, and she can speak to this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, for those who are joining us this evening, should you wish to speak to the file that is currently on the floor, we ask that you raise your hand in Zoom so that we may call on you. This is located in the center of the Zoom window when you move your mouse over the window, or it is located, if you're joining as a participant, you'll have to click on the participants tab and open up the list to the side, and the raise hand function will be located at the bottom of that list. So I'm just going to give a couple of seconds here to see if there's anyone who wishes to speak. We don't currently have any hands. So again, if there's anyone who wishes to speak to the matter for the public meeting, please raise your hand in Zoom so that we may call on you. Mr. Chair, there are no hands.
Thank you very much. If something comes to mind with any of the public that are here tonight, you can always do that in written form through the clerk and through our planning department. So I will now turn to the committee to see if there are any comments or questions that the committee may have. Seeing no hands, I will declare this meeting completed very quickly, and we'll now go to our regular agenda meeting. Thank you very much, everybody. So we have, I'll call the Planning Committee meeting number 26-2021. I'll call the meeting to order. There is an opportunity to approve the agenda, but I believe there may be a slight alteration in the agenda. Who would like to move that? Councillor Hill, you have the floor. How would you like to amend the agenda?
If we could move the consideration of the Mcadoo Lane proposal to the first item on the agenda, I would appreciate that.
No problem. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Asanic, thank you very much. All those, yes.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, to interrupt. We did get a first on the overall approval of the agenda from Councillor Hill. We did not get a second. I understand that Councillor Hill moved the amendment and Councillor Asanic seconded, but I need a seconder for the main motion.
Oh, okay. Councillor Hutchison.
Perfect. Thank you. And Mr. Chair, as well, the addendum.
Great. And that includes the addendum, which we've all received, I believe. So I will call the question on both of those votes. All those in favor of the amendment and those in favor of the agenda as amended with the addendum. Thank you very much. And so we have two confirmation of minutes, one from October 13th and one from October 21st. We've had an opportunity to read those. Is there a mover and a seconder for those two? Councillor Asanic, Councillor Hutchison. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. Disclosure of pecuniary interest. Seeing none. Delegations, we have none scheduled. Briefings, we have none. Business. Our first order of business tonight is the combined application regarding 235 Frontenac Street. And we have the report before us and the recommendation before us. Are there any comments from the committee regarding this first item? Seeing none, we will open it to the public in case members of the public wish to weigh in on this decision. Yes, Madam Clerk, I see Janice had her hand up.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I'm rushing this too much.
It's all right, Mr. Chair. If I could just interject just to get a point of clarification.
Sure.
I understood from the motion from Councillor Hill that he was moving the Mcadoos Lane matter first on the agenda.
Yes, absolutely.
So since that has been duly voted on, I believe we have to begin with the Mcadoo Lane.
You're absolutely right. I apologize. I am dysfunctional from lack of sleep. I apologize to everybody. So we will go to the Mcadoos Lane one, which is item C on our agenda. And we'll go to the committee to ask any questions. And after the committee has an opportunity to speak, we will recognize Councillor Oosterhoff. And again, my apologies. So,
Thank you. Mr. Chair, if I can just interject one last time, we do
Please.
have a staff planner here with a presentation ready to provide
Okay,
some
good.
additional information to the committee.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. You almost made my job a lot easier here tonight.
Sorry. about that.
Oh, that's okay.
Go ahead. You have the floor.
Okay, great. So hello to committee and to members of the public. My name is Janice and I'm a planner with the city. So I will be presenting staff's recommendation related to applications for official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for the property at 1533 Mcadoos Lane. The committee saw this application at a public meeting in December of last year. Next slide, please, Elizabeth. So the application proposes to redesignate the property from rural commercial to waste management industrial and to rezone the site from a special open space zone to a special disposal industrial zone. Successful applications would facilitate the introduction of a salvage yard and a metal recycling facility on the site. Next slide, please, Elizabeth. So the property has an area of approximately 6 hectares with significant frontage onto Mcadoos Lane. It is located adjacent to the bend at the west end of Mcadoos Lane, just east of Perth Road, and approximately 1 kilometer north of Highway 401 at its Division Street Perth Road exit. Next slide, please. The property is known locally as the former site of Kingston Family Fun World and is developed with facilities for a drive-in movie theater, mini golf course, batting cages, and a go-kart track. And here are just a couple of images of what's on the site now. Next slide, please. So the property is currently designated rural commercial in the official plan. This designation is the result of the longstanding use of the site as the former Family Fun World, which took advantage of the large lot size and the rural setting of the site. For context, rural commercial designations have not been pre-applied to vacant lots to direct commercial uses in the rural area, but instead the designation has historically been applied based on the location of existing uses at the time that the official plan was adopted. And new rural commercial uses are designated on a site-specific basis through amendment to the official plan, where the official plan outlines criteria for such amendments. And this is also consistent with how we apply the waste management industrial designation in the rural area. Next slide, please, Elizabeth. The property is currently zoned a special open space zone in zoning bylaw number 7626. This zone permits a commercial recreation park and a water park, and it recognizes the location of existing buildings and structures that are on the site associated with Family Fun World. The zone also contains specific provisions related to the lifting of a holding symbol, which is currently applied to the property and recommended to continue to apply. Next slide, please. So the application proposes to introduce a metal recycling facility, being AIM Recycling, and an auto parts and automobile recycling operation, being Kenny Upol, on the site. And just to refresh the memory of the committee and the public, the metal recycling facility would accept and sort metal on site, after which the bins would be taken off site for further processing, and no processing of metals would be permitted on the site. So this includes no shredding, and this is restricted through the recommended zoning bylaw in front of committee today. The proposed auto parts and automobile recycling operation, so Kenny Upol, differs from that of a typical salvage yard in both function and design. Kenny Upol purchases cars from customers, removes batteries and fluids at depollution stations within the building, and prior to placing vehicles on individual lifts in the self-serve customer area. The lifts are located in a grid pattern, and as such, the yard resembles a parking lot more than what we think of when we picture a typical salvage yard with cars kind of stacked on top of each other throughout the yard. Customers looking for parts are then able to determine exactly where a match would be located based on the categorized nature of the self-serve area. Once most of the usable parts are taken from a car, they are crushed on site and then taken off site for further processing. Next slide, please, Elizabeth. So to accommodate this proposed use, a new one-story building is proposed at the northeast corner of the site, which would accommodate offices, a sales room, and depollution facilities associated with the use. The building design is appropriate for the industrial use, providing a defined entrance with large windows and access coloring that provides visual interest. The building location maximizes separation from residential uses to the west and allows for physical screening of the elements of the site with industrial characteristics, being the car crusher and the depollution tanks. Next slide, please. So the proposed depollution tanks, crusher, and material sorting bins would be contained behind the proposed building on a reinforced concrete slab, which is an important site element to reduce the risk of contamination from the depollution process. Next slide, please. Customer parking would be accommodated in front of the building, and the parking area would contain 89 spaces, including 2 Type A and 2 Type B barrier-free spaces. A maximum of 11 used cars would be permitted to be displayed in the parking lot for sale on the site, and a 3-meter landscape strip would be provided, buffering the parking lot to the lot line abutting Mcadoos Lane. Next slide, please. Then the majority of the site would hold the self-serve customer area, which is proposed to accommodate approximately 1,400 cars and outdoor storage on those lifts. The cars in this area would be on the lifts, and the area would be finished with gravel treatment, so it would not be paved. Fencing would be provided around the entire car storage area for safety. Next slide, please. So as compatibility with adjacent land uses and views into the site have been noted as a key consideration in the review of this application, enhanced setbacks and mitigative screening measures have been included in the exterior side yard, which is outlined here. So a minimum 14-meter side yard is provided, up from 3 meters at the original submission, and this would accommodate a 1-meter high berm, a 2.4-meter high wooden fence on top of that berm, and an 8.5-meter wide multi-level planting strip on the outside of the fence, so abutting the road, to provide visual screening of the site. Next slide, please. So a number of items of correspondence have been received related to the application and are included in the report in front of committee tonight. Additionally, committee members have put forward a few questions at the public meeting held for the application last year. We did receive one additional piece of correspondence today, this afternoon, which was circulated to council. So that should be available for you to review. And I think my presentation here should respond to that, but if there's any further questions, I'm happy to take those. So in the following slides, I'm going to provide information related to the topics of interest that are outlined here from a policy and technical review perspective. And my apologies that this is slightly long, but I'm hoping that providing this information up front might make the night a little bit shorter for committee. So hopefully this is helpful to you all. Next slide, please. So the 2 properties to the west across Mcadoos Lane are zoned and used for commercial car sales, as well as 2 residential dwellings. And compatibility with these properties has been an important consideration through the technical review of the application. So to undertake this, the applicant has provided a review of the province's D-series guidelines, which aim to assess land use compatibility between industrial and sensitive land uses. For the use proposed, the guidelines recommend a 70-meter separation to industrial uses from the property line of a sensitive land use. And this is represented on the map here by the blue dotted line, which is slightly difficult to see on my small computer, but hopefully it's visible for you. Consistent with these guidelines, all elements of the industrial use, which could create compatibility issues from an industrial perspective, including the car crusher, the building, and the crushed cars and metal storage, have been located a significant distance outside of the 70-meter buffer at the far east side of the property and away from the sensitive land uses. Approximately 3 rows of cars in outdoor storage will be located within the 70-meter buffer area, which is 2 rows less than this original submission that we saw at a public meeting. The outdoor vehicle storage area functions much like a commercial car sales lot, in that the cars will not be stacked and will be organized in rows for customer viewing. Customers will be using their own tools to remove parts during regular business hours, which would result in similar noise to the existing auto service shop on the adjacent property. As well, the berming, fencing, and landscaping requirements that I discussed earlier will be located within this buffer area in order to further mitigate any visual or auditory impacts of the open storage use. With these proposed mitigation measures, it is our opinion that the proposal is consistent with the intent of the provincial guidelines for land use compatibility, as well as the official plans section 2.7 criteria, and that the site design and mitigative measures will appropriately buffer the site from the adjacent residential land use. And just to add for some context, the closest residential dwelling is located approximately 80 meters from the lot line of the subject property. And this means that the closest car in open storage behind the buffer area will be located approximately 95 meters from the nearest dwelling. Next slide, please, Elizabeth. So the property immediately to the south permits a racetrack use, and while the track has not been actively used for horse races since the 90s, some horses are still kept on the site. So through consultation with the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, or OMAFRA, as people might hear it referred to, the applicants have completed a minimum separation distance, or MDS, setback calculation. And as confirmed by the ministry, MDS does not actually apply to the subject application, as it is proposing a less sensitive use than the previous commercial use on the site. But despite this, MDS will apply to any future building permit application. And so a calculation was completed. The MDS calculation confirms that the building location exceeds minimum setback requirements by approximately 80 meters. Also, for the committee's information, a notice of complete application, a notice of public meeting, and a notice of tonight's meeting, so 3 separate notices, were provided to the adjacent property owner by regular mail as required by the Act. Staff have not received any correspondence from that property owner to date. Next slide, please. So concerns had also been raised related to the potential unattractive views into the site from surrounding roads. As shown in these photos, which were taken by me, the topography of the site and the surrounding lands actually make it quite difficult to see into the property from the 401 and from the Division Street Perth Road approaches without actively trying to do so. So you can see the corner of the property from some angles closer to the interchange, but the grading of the surrounding properties makes it challenging to actually see into the site at any distance. Next slide, please. So while the site does benefit from this natural screening from the area topography, we also recognize that it's important that on-site screening is provided to ensure that the use is not unattractive from surrounding approaches. To achieve this, as I discussed before, the side yard width has been expanded from 3 meters at the initial submission to 14 meters. Requirement for berming and wooden fencing on top of that berm along the side lot line has been introduced. The placement of a 2.4 meter high fence on top of the 1 meter berm will adequately screen the open storage area, which is permitted through the recommended zoning bylaw to be a maximum of 2.5 meters tall. Finally, the required planting strip width has been expanded from 3 meters to 8.5 meters. Multi-level landscaping, including trees, will be required within this planting strip. And I want to note that while the initial submission would have required a number of existing trees to be removed along this lot line, the expanded setbacks will allow us to have further review and negotiation with the property owner in order to retain as many of the existing trees along that lot line as possible. So these mitigative measures, including the trees, will further screen views of the site from surrounding approaches and, in staff's opinion, adequately address view line concerns. Next slide, please. So the next question that has come up is expanding this type of use to the south side of the road. So waste management industrial designated lands on Mcadoos Lane are currently limited to the north side of the road, east of the existing quarry site. And you can see the expanse of these types of uses already in place in the image here. Questions were raised regarding the appropriateness of expanding the designation to the south side of the road. So before I get into this on the next slide, I just want to recognize first that from a land use planning perspective, Mcadoos Lane serves a critical function to the city as a focused area for rural industrial, waste management industrial, and core uses. Grouping these type of uses together in limited location alleviates pressure for the introduction of similar uses spread across the rural area. The spreading out of these types of uses could increase land use compatibility issues and could also impede the viability of critical agricultural uses in the rural area where these uses are more concentrated. Next slide, please, Elizabeth. So our official plan clearly directs us to cluster waste management industrial uses in limited areas in the rural area. Mcadoos Lane currently contains approximately 70 hectares of waste management industrial lands on the north side of the road, which represents the largest cluster of these lands within the city. Introduction of waste management industrial sites in the area is therefore consistent with our official plan direction. While the expansion of the designation to the south side of the road would represent a change, it's important to also acknowledge that the property immediately next door to the west is already zoned for disposal industrial M4 zoning, and therefore it does permit a salvage and wrecking yard as of right. Looking further along the side of the road, the south side of the road, sorry, are existing M1 zones, which permit various industrial plants, transport yards, and storage yard uses as of right. So while the subject application would expand the extent of the waste management industrial designation to the south side of the street, it wouldn't actually introduce land use permissions that are inconsistent with the permissions that are already in place for various lots on the south side of the road. Next slide, please. So another topic of concern that has been raised is related to contamination potential from the proposed use. So protection of water and environmental health is a key consideration in review of all applications that we see, but especially for applications in the rural area. So these matters were closely reviewed by the city and the Cataraqui Region Conservation Authority, which I'll refer to as the CRCA from now on because that is a mouthful, as part of the technical review of the application. So in accordance with the direction of the Cataraqui Source Protection Plan and the official plan's source water protection policies, the applicants have outlined management practices that will be implemented to adequately manage the risk to groundwater quality. These practices include the removal of batteries and fluids from all vehicles prior to their placement in the yard, which will limit the potential for contamination in the storage yard area. Fluid removal will take place directly into depollution tanks, which are located on the reinforced concrete pad at the rear of the building in order to further limit abilities for contamination of the water table. The concrete slab area is outlined here in red, just to remind everyone of where that's located. All tanks would be equipped with a float sensor, which sound an alarm when tanks reach 80% capacity and shut the system down until the tank has been emptied. This prevents any spill of liquids from the tanks. So the CRCA is satisfied with the applicant's management approach and has also requested in accordance with source water protection policy direction that the applicants prepare a standalone risk management plan through the site plan control process in order to document and secure the risk management measures that will be taken for site contaminants. Further technical review of that plan will be undertaken by the CRCA at the site plan control stage in order to ensure that all best practices are followed and that the risk is adequately managed. In addition to the on-site practices and the risk management plan, the stormwater management strategy for the site also includes quality and quantity control assurance measures, including an oil separator to address any runoff from the concrete slab, as well as a hydrodynamic separator at the stormwater management pond at the southwest side of the site, which I've also outlined on this image as well. This stormwater management approach has been reviewed by city engineering staff as well as the CRCA. Both agencies have no concern with approval of the official plan and zoning bylaw amendments and will be undertaking further technical review at the detailed site plan control stage in order to ensure that all appropriate control measures are secured and all policies related to stormwater management are complied with. In addition to the controls that I mentioned already, the applicants also require a number of provincial approvals for the proposed use. The Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks has indicated that an end-of-life vehicle approval and a stormwater management approval will be required, among others. This provides an additional layer of assurance that all regulatory and best practice requirements will be fulfilled related to environmental protection and stormwater management for the proposed use. And the hold that's recommended to be applied to the site would be contingent on the applicants receiving those approvals from the ministry prior to council being able to lift the hold. So based on what I've outlined here, staff are satisfied that the proposal meets all regulatory and policy direction related to water protection, which are put into place in order to appropriately manage the risks and provide layers of protection, particularly in the rural area. Next slide, please. Some questions were also raised about noise generated from the site and how this would be regulated. So the noise study submitted with the application concludes that with appropriate muffling, the proposal will comply with all relevant provincial and local noise policy. So that muffling would be something that would be conditioned through the site plan control agreement. The location of the crusher is regulated through the recommended bylaw in order to ensure compliance with that noise study and its recommendations. And this means it will be located at least 229 meters from the exterior side lot line. From a day-to-day use perspective, crushing activities will be limited to regular business hours from Monday to Friday, and movement of cars within the yard will also be limited to normal business hours and will not occur during evenings or weekends. Customers removing parts from cars will be doing so only during the daytime hours and mainly using manual tools. As such, day-to-day sound levels will not be a significant increase from the previous uses on the property, which included a go-kart track and a drive-in movie theater. In terms of traffic impacts, it's anticipated that approximately 2 trucks per day will be accessing the site to assist with site operations, and customer traffic would be during regular business hours and is not anticipated to be a substantial increase from previous uses. City staff have reviewed the application and have no concerns in terms of increased traffic levels or the suitability of the existing road system in the area to accommodate the use. Next slide, please. So just to touch on official plan policy direction to bring us back here for the application of a new waste management industrial designation. Similar to the approach for rural commercial designations I described earlier, the city does not generally pre-designate waste management industrial areas within the rural area. Rather, proposals for new or expanded designations are assessed on an individual basis to ensure a high level of study specific to the proposed use and location. The official plan provides criteria for the consideration of new waste processing and transfer facilities in the city, which are intended to inform the review of these types of applications. So as described in detail in staff's report, we are of the opinion that the sub-application satisfies these criteria, and as such, the redesignation is appropriate for the site and conforms to the intent and purpose of the official plan. Next slide, please. In terms of the rezoning requests, the applicants are proposing to rezone the site to a site-specific special disposable industrial, so D47H zone, to permit the uses in the site layout proposed. The recommended bylaw has been written so as to limit the permitted uses to that have been assessed through this application. So the bylaw limits uses to an automobile wrecking yard, a salvage yard, and an accessory vehicle and retail sales. Sanitary landfills, telecommunication towers, transportation depots, warehouses, and public uses are all permitted in the parent M4 zone, but have not been included in the permitted uses for this site in order to limit to what we are reviewing today. The bylaw provisions have been written to implement the site layout as well, reviewed and secured through this application, including mitigation measures in the exterior side yard, height limitations for the open storage area, and the location of the crusher. The intent in preparing the bylaw was really to restrict development to that already viewed and supported through this application. The recommended bylaw would also maintain the existing holding symbol on the property and would further clarify the requirements for any future lifting of that hold. A holding symbol, just to provide some background, is a tool provided by the Planning Act which allows municipalities to restrict certain land uses until a time that stipulated conditions are fulfilled in order for council to pass a bylaw to lift that hold. In this case, in order to apply to lift the hold, the applicants would be required to submit a further hydrogeological report outlining the detailed methods for private servicing on the site, would be required to receive all ministry approvals for the use, and would be required to have an approved site plan control agreement with the city registered on title. Next slide, please. In conclusion, staff were satisfied that the proposal is consistent with the PPS as it contributes to a diversified rural economy and supports additional employment opportunities within the rural area. The proposal can be sustained by existing rural service levels and will not constrain the city's undeveloped rural lands. The proposed use would not constitute a good use of service lands within our urban boundary, and as such, a location within the rural area is most appropriate. The proposal would add a new waste management industrial use in an area where the designation is already clustered as directed by our official plan, and it also conforms to official plan policies related to new waste management industrial designations. Sorry, I lost my place there. Through technical review, the site configuration has been altered as discussed throughout this presentation to implement appropriate mitigation to ensure land use compatibility. Our internal and external technical commenting agencies are satisfied with the proposal at this stage. Further technical review of detailed design, including the risk management plan I outlined and the detailed stormwater management plan, would be undertaken at the site plan control stage if this application is successful. The proposal is consistent with the provincial policy statement, conforms to the general intent and purpose of the official plan, and represents good land use planning, and is therefore recommended for approval. Next slide, please. In terms of next steps, if the subject application is successful, the applicants will be required to submit an application for site plan control in order to move forward with the proposal. Through the site plan process, the requirements that I outlined earlier would be reviewed in more detail by the CRCA. The applicants would also be responsible for obtaining any required approvals from the ministry and provide evidence of such to the city, as well as a hydrogeological report, which I mentioned before. Once these requirements were met, a bylaw would be presented to council, and it would be up their decision if they chose to lift the holding symbol or not. Next slide, please. So that concludes my presentation today. I'm happy to take any questions, and I also have James Barrington Park here to support me. We have met representatives from the applicant's team as well who are available to answer any questions from committee or the public.
Thank you very much. And I think I've got the timing right now. I will go to the committee for questions. Remember, we have an opportunity to speak and make further questions or comments at the end of the public input as well. Yes, Councillor Hill.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So I just wondered about stacking. I know that they've gone to a great measure to prevent sightline issues, but typically, I think when people think of something like this, they're thinking of a junkyard for cars, and that often when they're, particularly in the United States, they've seen them where the cars are stacked sort of 6 to 8 cars high, and therefore they would be visible. What is there any restrictions in terms of cars being stacked in this lot?
Ms. Grant.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so as we saw on the site layout, there is an area behind the building, beside where that reinforced concrete slab is, where they would store crushed cars before they're taken off site. But the entire open storage area is subject to that 2.5 meter maximum height for any open storage. So that is something that could be enforced if they were not in compliance with that anywhere within that open storage area.
Thank you. Any further questions from the committee? Yes, Councillor Osanek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few questions. Did the CRCA, did they actually provide any input about the risk of contamination to the groundwater?
Yes, Ms. Grant.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so the CRCA reviewed the application in detail, as I talked about in my presentation, and they are satisfied in principle with what has been put forward at this stage. However, they have required that standalone risk management plan, which would go into the further detail to make sure that all the minute details are secured through the site plan control stage. So they are satisfied at this point for the feasibility that the application is appropriate, and further details would be secured through that site plan control stage.
Thank you. And so this is just going to have a car crusher. Is that right? Can you talk about car shredding? Are we having anything in the application that at no point in the future can a car shredder be added to the site?
Yes, thank you, and through you. Yeah, the zoning bylaw does specifically say that processing of metals, including shredding, is not permitted on the site.
Does that mean that in the future they could apply for a car shredder and try to get an exemption like all developments do if they don't comply with the specific bylaw? They come to planning committee and try to get, an amendment?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it is a prohibition in the zoning, so they wouldn't be able to vary it, but they would always have the ability to apply for a further zoning bylaw amendment, and that would be subject to committee review and decision, council decision.
Thank you. What about air pollution? Has that been addressed with the car crusher?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so they do require an approval specifically from the ministry for the car crusher. That is one of the specific ministry approvals. So that is something that would be looked at by the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks.
Thank you. And then is it true that for the removal of car parts on the site that it can be done by people from the public, like that the people from the public would be coming to this business and they could go to a car and remove specific parts?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so the business model of Can You Pull is that they're on itemized lists, and then they're able to tell people exactly where the carport they're looking for is. They do remove any fluids and any batteries, so those are not within the cars to be removed by the public, but mechanical parts are. We do have representatives from the Kenny Upel team on the site who can probably speak to the specifics of their business model a little bit better than me, but that's the format of the business.
Yeah, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So I'm reading the letters that we've received, and you know, it looks like I'm not a mechanic, right? But it looks like there's fluids that are not, you know, like within a car that are not the main parts that might be taken out, where those fluids could still leak and, you know, eventually contaminate the groundwater. And I don't like that part at all, especially because everyone relies on the groundwater for their drinking water since it's north of the 401. So if there is somebody from the company that wants to address that, if they do.
That's great. Just raise your hand if you would like to address the comments from Councillor Asani. The clerk, Madam Clerk, do we see any hands?
Mr. Chair, I'm not seeing any hands. I do see, oh, Miss Tucker is one of the agents on the file. She might be able to respond.
Thank you. Ms. Tucker, I recognize you.
Yes, through the chair. Thank you guys for tonight. So there will be the risk management plan as was discussed earlier, and that is a very fulsome plan that goes through and contains all of the spill management. If there are spills, how it's cleaned, how the soil's restored. It is very well monitored. With respect to the shredder, the site's not big enough to have a shredder on the site ever. Like that's never been the intention on this site. They have other sites for that. This business model of the Kenny Upel AIM, they run these smaller sites all over, basically all over North America, which then go to bigger processing sites, one being in Hamilton, one being in Montreal. And then with the contamination from the cars, so the cars are fully depolluted. There is I believe it's about a 30-point or 40-point checklist that has to be gone through every time they bring a car in, and how they depollute it. They pull all the fluids out. The tanks where the fluids are stored are directly linked into a system of hoses which run through the building and out into the tanks. And then once the tanks hit 80% capacity, an alarm sounds, and they're shut down until they're emptied. So the tanks are reinforced. They are 2 TSSA requirements. We have MECP approval, or we'll have to get MEC approvals for everything that we do on site to run this site. And as part of the risk management plan, it will look at how do they deal with spills, how do they deal with any sort of potential for contamination. And then also with the stormwater management plan, the site will go through some oil grit separators to a hydraulic system, be cleaned before anything goes out back into the ditch along Mcadoo's Lane on this west side. And then so the site is they have all the measures in place on all their sites. They are very well aware of the environment. They're very conscious of the environment, and there is no intention for anything. And same goes with every other site along Mcadoos Lane. They would have these plans in place to prevent contamination.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I have another question. So for the crushing hours, I know we kind of talked about that during the public meeting. It's until 5 o'clock, but it's also on weekends. Is that right?
Through the chair, it's not on weekends. It's Monday to Friday.
Monday to Friday. I am still worried about the horses that are to the south. And then during the day, is it like all day or is it just like 1 hour during the day on the weekdays, Monday to Friday?
Through the chair, that would be dependent on how many cars need to be crushed that day, but it's not a consistent running for 8 hours straight. But that is also part of what we did, worst case scenario of 8 hours straight, and that's why it's located where it is, away from the residential homes.
Yeah, but there's still horses to the south, say like adjacent. So anyway, thank you. Those are my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Who else might have a question from the committee? Seeing none, would you kindly take the chair, Councillor Hill?
Take the chair and recognize you.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I didn't know it was going to be Miss Councillor. I thought I was okay. You can be
I
it.
think Councillor Hill is the vice chair, and you're the vice chair. Thank you very much. Yeah, a couple. As I understand it, and perhaps Ms. Grant can comment on this. If approved, there will actually be an increase in the number of trees on site. And because of the planning of the berm the way it is, there'll be likely to be far less removal of trees from the initial application. Am I reading that right?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. Yes, you're right. So the tree preservation plan that was submitted indicated that there are 37 trees on the property, which would be removed. So the replacement requirement at that stage would be 61 trees in accordance with the tree bylaw. I was just taking a sip of iced tea before I turned my camera on. But since the exterior side yard has been expanded, it does give us opportunity to negotiate with the applicants in order to keep a number more of those trees. The reason why some of those trees needed to be removed was because it was planned to be where cars would be kept, whereas that is no longer the case, and they were required to have a planting strip anyways there. So whatever trees are in good condition and can be kept within that planting strip is something that the city would be working on with the applicant.
Thank you. And I'm curious, could you explain how site plan bump ups work? And I believe there's an opportunity for the Councillor Oosterhoff, if he so chooses, if this gets passed, to request such a bump up.
Yes, thank you. Through you. So yeah, every site plan control application that we receive as the city are accepted by staff once they're complete and then circulated to all members of council with the ability for any member of council to bump that up through a motion at council. So the situation here would be consistent with any other site plan control application we receive. So the councillor could certainly bump it up if he got support from council to do so.
Great. And I see Mr. Park has his hand up. Sorry, I should have let Councillor Hill do that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just to add to Ms. Grant's comments, the bump up motion can come at any time. It does not have to wait until the applicant submits plan application. So that could be made at a future meeting of council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe that's all for me for now, although I'm sure I'll remember something I forgot in a little while. So if you could return the chair, Councillor Hill.
Councillor Osanek has the chair. She's the vice chair.
Oh,
Councillor.
okay. Sorry, I'm
Okay, if I do have it, I get return it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. So if there are no other members of the committee that would like to speak, we do have 3 councillors from that we will recognize. And the first is Councillor Oosterhoff. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, everyone. I don't see the raised hand or how to work it, so thank you for acknowledging me, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I have a lot here, but I will read to what I sent to the councillors this week as a way of getting me warmed up here to what I would like to communicate. So as a rural councillor, I am very disappointed in the decision of planning. Once again, the rural area is subjected to the stain of old OP thinking and driving another nail in the coffin of failed rural planning. I will be asking Planning Committee to not approve this recommendation from planning. The future of positive development, and that's a key planning issue, the future of positive development on Mcadoo Lanes is dependent on this. No amount of fencing or setbacks or even trees or even a bump up will soften the blow of another automobile graveyard. Good development spurs positive economic growth. This proposal does not. The provincial policy statement states that the goal of development is to enhance the quality of life of citizens. This clearly does not. Also, the provincial policy statement states that developments must be environmentally responsible. This development advances environmental decline by allowing waste management to cross the road of all things and allow the possibility of oil and gas leakage to infiltrate the ground and to migrate south towards the city and into the urban waterways. Good planning also spurs further positive development at this location and a prime location that it is. I drove there today and parked, and this is probably the highest point in the city. A real tribute to our city that we're going to make it a graveyard of cars. Good planning, I'll say again, spurs further positive development. We are sentencing Mcadoo Lane to another 50 years of decline. Enough is enough, and the degradation of Mcadoos Lane has to come to an end. Please consider this and many other points that clearly show that public good, as required in planning, is not advanced by this development. And Mr. Chair, I have just a few more thoughts and comments and questions about this. But I want to reiterate and underline that this planning decision to recommend it is just continuation of a bad plan for Mcadoo Lane, which could be considered a brownfield. It is shameful how much toxins in a big rain come down the hill on the north side and go through our treasure, a CRCA little cat. It is hard to be there when you see what comes down the hill and as a pollutant every time it rains. And it's a historic mess. And once again, we are allowing us planning, and planning committee has a chance. We have a golden opportunity to say enough tonight. We can find the rationale for it. Once again, we have a forced fit, something that doesn't belong at this location. I respect the business. It's never about that. It's never personal. It's in this situation, it doesn't belong here. And an approval would say that we don't know what we are doing. It will say we'll approve anything. This is hardly an example of good land use. Just because it's written at the end of the presentation doesn't mean it's true. And absolutely, it doesn't seem to matter if there is a negative impact on the community. Thousands and thousands of cars every day are going to know it's there, and it will be noticeable. If you have not visited a car graveyard such as this, then you don't know what you're doing if you approve it. I have. And it's going to bring shame onto the rural area, in my opinion. There is no regard for the potential long-term impact of this development. That must be considered, not just the environment, but visual impact. These developments should be put on a holding pattern and wait for an opportunity, That's possible for an appropriate location. It is completely possible to do that. Good development spurs, as I said, good economic growth. This development does the opposite. It extends the legacy, the tragedy that is Mcadoo Lane. Can someone explain to me and planning committee how it can be positive? Other developers have come and gone in frustration with our city. This is what we will approve, they're going to say, when they had so much better for us. So much better. Economic prosperity is possible that we need in this city. We know that. We need positive, net zero, sustainable development, and it's in the works.
Excuse me, you have 30 seconds. You'll have an opportunity to speak again when the motion gets on the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do. The question I have, then, if I can stop the clock, the question I have, and to get back to why wouldn't they require a containment apron under each parking location? Because as far as I understand in my research, the significant amount of pollution will occur with irresponsible disassembly, of the vehicle where it's parked. Has that ever been considered?
Thank you very much. I'll turn to Ms. Grant or any of the proponents to answer some of those questions you've asked. And I see Mr. Breyer has his hand.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor, for your comments on the application to date. I know we've had a lot of conversations about this site and about Mcadoo's Lane and what that could look like long term. So I'm going to take a chance here and respond to your comments that you've raised so far. The official plan that we have as a city is very specific, and it outlines criteria that an application has to meet when considering whether or not it is appropriate to change a land use designation to a waste management industrial designation. And part of that is the planning justification, as well as the supporting studies that go along with it, which are reviewed by technical experts to come to a conclusion on whether or not a land use change like this is supportable. Both the official plan and the PPS, which is the provincial policy statement that you've mentioned, contain higher level goals on how to guide land use change. And if you think about the rural lands, which is the area outside of the urban boundary, it is a sum of multiple functions. So you have your agricultural functions, your rural residential functions. It also includes things like aggregate resources and hamlets and other things which are important in rural areas. And part of that thinking in the rural sense is also waste management, rural industrial and rural commercial uses, all which in their totality equal up the sum of the parts of what a rural area is and what it can be comprised of. And you're right, the goal of the PPS is to enhance the quality of life for all citizens across Ontario. And what that means is you have to look at and evaluate these land use changes to understand if they're going to have a positive impact or a negative impact on a host of applicable understandings, which include both person and environmental health. I know you mentioned you have some concerns about the environmental responsibility of this site. But when we're considering the environmental aspects of it, looking at the site as it is today, it is a vacant, underutilized site that was once previously developed that does not contain any natural heritage features on the site. It doesn't contain significant woodlands or water courses. So that was forming part of our evaluation when we're looking at the redevelopment of this site. In addition to that, the application has submitted with it a number of studies and considerations around the pollution control for this site, which requires additional input once we get to the site plan control stage, which is the risk management plan. That plan sets out the long-term thinking on how to address, should there be any concerns about pollution or spills on the site, how to handle that once these things do come to light. As they've mentioned before, as well as Ms. Grant and what's in her report, the site contains an area where cars will be depolluted, and there are a series of stopgaps measures to make sure that that pollution does not get off-site. And if there are minor spills that do occur, that's where the risk management plan comes into effect. The CRCA, as well as our engineering department, has reviewed these considerations and deemed it to be appropriate to support this land use change, with the condition, and this is built into the site-specific zone, into the holding, that they obtain the appropriate approvals for what they're doing, which includes the risk management plan produced by the CRCA. In addition to that, should there be any concerns about runoff and any pollution or contamination associated with that, everything is being directed towards that central stormwater management pond, which has a series of mitigation measures to depollute any runoff associated with that. So looking at the sum total of all of the aspects of the site, the fact that it is not in and of itself part of a natural heritage feature, as well as all of the mechanisms that are in place in order to make sure that should there be any sort of pollution contaminant concerns that they are addressed at the time, makes this development environmentally responsible for the use that it is, knowing what it is and what's being put forward. Thinking about some of the other aspects, while this is one of the highest points in the city, Mcadoos Lane is one of the higher points. And if we consider the images that were looked at today, one of the most visible and prominent things on the site is the existing old drive-in movie theater screen, for which you cannot really see the entirety of it when driving around the site for the most part. It is quite a bit higher than anything that will be on that western portion of the site. And if you look inside the site-specific zone, there is a height maximum for things that can be stored, and that is set at 2.5 meters. And if you take into consideration the combination of the 1 meter high berm and the 2.4 meter high privacy fence that's going to be erected around the site, we're at about a meter extra in buffering to help screen and visually screen this from view. In addition to that, there is a requirement for a landscape planting strip to also add to the entrance feel when you're coming into Mcadoos Lane to also buffer and screen this site. So, excuse me, there are a lot of appropriate mechanisms that have been taken into account to mitigate any sort of visual impact which might be seen as negative. And I think I've addressed a couple of the other points actually now, thinking about what I said about the containments and the contaminants on the site. This site has been thoroughly reviewed in light of both our official plan and CRCA regulations, and staff tonight, in consideration of all of the items that have been put forward and the questions that have been put to us, have landed at the conclusion that this land use change is supportable given the provincial policy, local policy, and the regulations of the CRCA. If I've missed any of your questions, I'd be happy to answer them. So please just let me know if something was missed.
I muted myself because my dog is barking. Councillor Chappelle, we recognize you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's always a pleasure to come and speak before my fellow colleagues and friends on the Planning Committee. I'm going to use a little bit of the technique that I've learned by visiting these Planning Committee meetings and bend the words and meanings of words. To suggest this site has no natural heritage, I would argue that there are many young children born from their parents visiting this site in past years. So I do think there's a natural heritage value. I would like to know if any of the staff have visited the sites that this proponent has at alternate locations in the province or in the province of Quebec. And I'd like to know if any of them have ever visited a wrecking yard of sorts at all within even the region for a matter. And because I find the simplistic approach that's been presented is absolutely bombastic. To suggest to me that a fuel decontamination site would remove all liquids is idiotic. Are you suggesting to me that they're going to remove all the antifreeze, all the windshield washer fluid, all of the transmission fluid, all of the gear fluid, all of the oils, plus any of the gas tanks and any of the fuel from the fuel lines? I don't think so. So if you have 1,200 cars that are now been moved after decontamination to a site where they're being parked on a graveled roadbed, And let's just assume, for argument's sake, that a combination of, because you're not paying these people $50 an hour to dismantle cars, that somebody is not really paying attention and leaves a bit of fluid. So if I look at today's typical milk carton that we give to our kids in school of 200 milliliters, and I say, let's look at half of that volume, say 100 milliliters is potentially still in a car mixed up with a variety of different fluids. So if we had 100 milliliters per car and you've had 1,200 cars, that's 120 liters dripping, dripping, dripping into a fractured substrate limestone rock face that will then percolate down into the ground. And then we'll have the problem like we have in the inner harbor or the industrial sites where the rain comes and washes it into the inner harbor. And if you don't think the water can travel that far, I encourage you to take the next exit over on Montreal Road and look at the rock cut. On any day after it's been rainy or moist, you can see water jetting out of the limestone rock face, not from the surface to the top, but longitudinally across through the crevices. So what we have, I don't think anyone has consulted the issue of that. We have a fractured limestone substrate, and it's all highly sensitive to point pollution. And we are actually creating a point source pollution in this area, which is not necessary. And so from a perspective of the residents of Countryside, they were promised an amalgamation to have water brought up to that site. At amalgamation, they still haven't had water brought up. This is not a project that is suitable to, and I would encourage my friends on the planning committee to turn it down. This has had an incredible opportunity to be a showcase site for our community, welcoming people to Kingston. And I don't like the idea of having a junkyard in my backyard. And I'm really tired of the attitude that we have expressed that Countryside and rural communities are the dump sites of the city, because that is not an appropriate message to say, considering we've declared a climate emergency in this community, take this business elsewhere. It is not going to bring the jobs, that you profess. I'm not impressed at all that we would even be considering this in that location when there is so much promise for Mcadoo Lane, especially at that high point in the city, that showcase that could be, but instead we're going to put junk cars there. So I'm very disappointed yet again with planning staff of the city of Kingston.
Thank you. Is there anybody that hasn't spoken from council? I don't see any. I will turn to Ms. Grant and anybody else that would like to address Councillor Chappelle's comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, I will start, and then I will leave it to my managers if they want to fill in any gaps that I leave here. So the first question was related to, have we visited any Kenny UPRO sites in Ontario or Quebec? And I have not visited any, but I did talk to an area planner from one of the Ontario sites to get their sense of how that site was operating there and if they had run into any issues. And the planner from that municipality indicated that they were actually quite impressed by the Kenny UPRO site, that the company was not subject to a site plan control application in that case, but that they were still following all of their requirements, even though that they weren't through a registered site plan agreement. So the sentiment there was that they were impressed by that site. I can't say I've called every city with a Kenny UPRO in it, but I just thought I would provide that context for the committee. Yes, and then the management plan for the contaminants is that all fluids from the cars are removed through their standard practice. And so I think that there was a comment that was not possible, but that is the practice of the company. I understand there may be some leftover contaminants within lines, and that is where that risk management plan and the stormwater management controls come into place to ensure that there is quality control of any water that is leaving the site. Further, they will also be required to get ministry approvals for that stormwater management plan, and that is something that is reviewed, enforced, and followed up on by the ministry. So that's an additional level of approvals, and I will not call myself an expert on stormwater management, and so that is why we have relied in our review on our city engineers as well as the qualified staff at the CRCA in order to review the documents that have been submitted by the application from a feasibility point. So just for some clarification, right now we are at a feasibility stage. Detailed design is what happens at site plan control. So from a feasibility stage, our city engineers and the staff at the CRCA are satisfied that this proposal is meeting regulatory requirements for managing stormwater management on the site. And I think this is the last point. I just wanted to clarify that I think the message that we are trying to send is not that this is a dump. We are aligning with the direction provided in the official plan to cluster waste management uses together. And so, as I mentioned, this is the biggest waste management industrial site in the city. And so the intent is to cluster that in one area in the rural area so as to not have a bunch of dumps throughout the rural area in this one location. So the intent is certainly not to say that the rural area should have dumps throughout it, but we are following official plan guidance related to clustering. So hope that identifies some or responds to some of the questions and comments, but happy to address any others.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to comment on the previous questions? Seeing none, I will now ask, have all the questions that the committee wished to address, have they all been put forward and responded to? I believe so. In that case, we will open this up to members of the public.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, we do already have a couple of hands raised here before we get started. For those who wish to speak to the current file, please raise your hand in Zoom so that we may call on you. Again, this is located in the center of the screen when you move your mouse over the Zoom window. For those who are joining us by phone, you will be required to press *9 in order to raise your hand. Mr. Chair, would you like to go over how we will be receiving the comments tonight?
Sure can. Members of the public are given 5 minutes to make their, to put forward their questions or comments. I will, thanks to the clerk with the stopwatch, I will be able to give you a 30-second heads up to let you know that your time is running short. You just, when you begin, you should identify yourself by name and give your address. And I think that's it. So I didn't leave anything out. So I will now turn it over to the clerk to organize the speakers list.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, the first to speak is James Morgan.
Thank you. Mr. Morgan, the chair is yours. I'm sorry, the floor is yours.
Hello, I'm James Morgan, and I'm from Morgan's Diesel Truck Parts on Mcadoos Lane. We, as a wrecker, salvage yard, whatever you want to categorize are, strive to be as clean as possible. When new technologies come along, new processes are better, we implement those. As of when new laws come along, like his vehicle branding in '98, and recently ELV has come in, and the light vehicles. As a truck wrecker, we get grouped in with cars. We don't really have the same kind of business outlook as auto wreckers, but we get grouped into it, and we don't really appreciate that. We also don't like to be called a stain on the city. We are a taxpayer, and we try to do things environmentally correct as any other person on this earth. But there is some things that you have said are correct. It is damn zero pollution from a vehicle, unless you're going to have an.
We seem to have lost the audio. I'm sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Sorry. We try to do the best we can as a wrecker. When we originally had to apply for a wrecking license, we had to be a mile from the 401. That was the rule. That would put this other place not a mile from the 401, because a mile from the 401 is on the north side of Mcadoo's Lane. Exactly. That's why we are where we are. The fact that they say they're only going to have 2 trucks increase on this lane is impossible. There is no way you can manage a salvage yard with 1,400 cars and a scrap business and only have 2 vehicles. If they don't add 25 trucks, I don't know how they will do it. And they're talking 1,400 cars on site. They're going to process probably 6,000 to 10.
Again, we seem to have lost your audio, Mr. Morgan.
I don't know why. You got me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
You pull because they have to pay more than scrap value for the cars. I'm a fellow wrecker. I don't have a problem with them having a wrecking.
I'm sorry. If you could repeat that, we lost you for.
It's really going to hurt existing parking lots, or existing auto wreckers in the area. They will cease to exist. This yard is not just Canada wide. This company is North America wide. He is huge. He has 26 yards in California alone. So when they do say that they are going to do things right, they probably are going to do it to the technology we have, because they are in most strictest EPA environmental areas in the world. As far as noise from the car crusher, I would not anticipate you would ever hear that.
Again, we've lost your audio connection. Could
Yeah,
you?
I want to hear about the noise.
Yeah. Could you repeat what you just said? And if it doesn't work, perhaps you can log off and log back on, and that may correct the problem.
Hold on.
Madam Clerk, what would you suggest?
Mr. Chair, I believe with how the audio sound is going, it could be internet connection. I see that Mr. Morgan has logged off. Councillor Hutchison did raise the point of order. I'm not sure if he wanted to.
I'm sorry, I missed that. Councillor Hutchison, I recognize your point of order.
My point of order was I thought Mr. Morgan had something important to say, and we should have had him phone in. Makes no difference whether we can see him or not. We don't see him now.
That's true.
And I think we should allow him to start again, because he was in the middle of thoughts like 3 or 4 times and he got cut off.
Okay, Mr. Morgan, I see that you're back on. If you keep your video off, but use either phone in or use the audio connection, it shouldn't cut you off. I think it's an internet issue at your end.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I certainly can. And go right ahead. And if you keep your video off, I think it'll work. So could you repeat your comments that Councillor Osanek was particularly concerned with hearing what you were saying about, what was that, Councillor Osanek?
Right. It wasn't just noise. Even where it got really bad, Mr. Morgan, was when you said 10,000 cars. So if you have your speech written, that's where we could no longer hear you. Really, it was all.
Yeah, Yep, no problem.
10,000 cars.
Well, in the old days when the Mcadoo's Auto Parts was going up the road, they got close to doing 5,000 cars a year 20 years ago. You know, AIM Scrap Metal is a large scrap processing company. It's probably one of the biggest in Canada, and they're coming and they mean business. They're gonna process cars. And I have done business with this company, and I don't have anything bad to say about the company. The business we have done has been good. And they usually, when they say they're going to do something, they do it. But, you know, we've had to jump through some hoops over the years. You know, we had to be a mile north of the highway, and we've had all these other things implemented on us. You know, we feel some of that times that it should be fair for all. Getting back to the pollution thing, I don't know if you heard that. Like we have an engine outside. It has to be wrapped up with shrink wrap. It has to be drained. It has to be in either a building or on a cement slab. In our business, we can't keep an engine outside because a lot of our engines are worth $25,000 to $50,000 a piece. You don't put something that valuable outside in the weather. So, furthermore, if you didn't hear it, there's no way that 2 trucks are going to be able to run this business. There's going to be probably closer to 25 trucks, in my opinion, being that they're going to be hauling scrap in and out. And to have that many cars going through their year, like they have 1,400 on site, they're probably going to go between 6,000 and 10,000 a year as a revolving thing. Because it's a business of volume. It's not a buy low, sell high retail business. And the issue is they probably don't want the Kenny U-Pole, but they have no choice to have it because they need the retail public to lower the cost of the cars because they have to pay more than scrap value. And one of the things is none of us can operate like they did in the 50s and 60s, where you got the rows of cars that are 20 feet high. And, you know, that's a thing of the past. Because in my business, I pay sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars for the wrecked vehicles or the used vehicles that I buy to dismantle. You know, and I also welcome anybody to call me between 8 and 5. You can talk to me on the phone. You're welcome to come look at the yard. It's not an issue.
Thank you. Point of order from Councillor Hill.
Yeah, I think one of the points that he was making earlier that got cut off was about the crusher and the noise. And I think that's what Councillor Osanek was asking about as well. So I just wondered if you could repeat the comments he made about the noise of the crusher.
Good comment. Mr. Morgan, and I've allowed you some additional time.
Yep. No, I'll get to the point on the crusher.
Because of the issue of you being cut off, but the floor is yours.
I can't foresee a great deal of noise from a modern car crusher. It's going to be at the back of the site. It's basically going to be made no more noise than a hydraulic excavator. Like it's a large machine that just bales the car into a 4x8 cube. There's already businesses on the lane with that kind of machine, and they make less noise than a rock crusher, and we don't hear the rock crusher. Between the dump trucks and the cement trucks that are already here, I have no concern over increased noise from the car crusher. I can't see that being the significant noise. But the lane is quite busy with heavy truck traffic now. And, you know, we're talking about adding another business with increased cars, increased trucks.
And I'll give you 30 seconds now.
Yep.
Just to sum up.
I don't know how we can handle much more traffic here without significant road upgrades for this project.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Morgan.
You're welcome.
I will turn back to the clerk. I see Mr. Gibson has a hand up.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, my name is Mike Gibson. I presently reside at 1566 Mcadoos Lane, which is right next door to this property. My family has lived here for just under 50 years now. We do have 2 wells on this property, and we are probably about 30 feet lower than this property. And I'd like to address the letter that I wrote in May about the contamination and why I believe it definitely will become contaminated. You cannot, it is impossible for them to completely decontaminate a car unless they completely dismantle it. They're going to punch a hole in the oil pan, they're going to punch a hole in the transmission pan, and they're going to drain the fluid, they're going to drain the radiator and the gas tank. Every car has gas lines from front to back. Every car has 4 brake lines from front to back. Every car has power steering lines. You cannot empty these unless you take them off the vehicle in the contamination site, which they will not be doing. It's going to be going into the yard, 1,400 cars, and then amateur people are going to be coming to take parts off these cars, not professionals, and they're going to cut brake lines, they're going to cut fuel lines, they're going to cut power steering lines. And they are saying that there's going to be 1,400 cars here, and they're going to turn it over approximately every 3 months, which is going to be in excess of 6,000 cars. And as the one gentleman said earlier, there's going to be minor spills. Well, there's going to be more than 6,000 minor spills a year on this property going into the ground and the gravel and to the limestone, which will travel to my property, which will travel to the 70-acre racetrack right next door, and then the 200 acres that are between the racetrack and the 401. And so I believe that this is all going to ruin good potential growth in those 270 acres because of this one project. And I do firmly believe that my land will become contaminated. And so what I would like to ask the planning board and the councilors is, would they like this position and this possible contamination right next to their property? And if that's the case, would anybody ever consider putting this in your new industrial park? And I know the answers to both those questions, but they're legitimate questions. And I know this contamination is going to happen. I grew up in an auto wreckers. My family has had 2 auto wreckers, and I am a mechanic. There is no way in the world you can decontaminate this any single car unless you completely dismantle it. They'll take the transmission fluid out of the transmission, but in the transmission is the torque converter, which holds 6 liters approximately of fluid. And that 6 liters is going to stay in there until some unlicensed person comes in and removes that transmission. And then they're going to dump it on the ground. And it's going to be brake fluid, transmission fluid, gasoline, power steering fluid. This all is going to end up on that ground for approximately, at the low end, of 6,000 cars a year for multiple years. There is no doubt in my mind. I grew up at Raceway Auto Parts, Mcadoo Auto Parts. I know what the grounds are like up there. It's all going to move to the south side of this road now, and it's going to contaminate my property and the property to the south of it. If anybody has any questions about why I feel that way, please feel free to ask.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Who's next, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Chair, we don't currently have any other hands. Perhaps I could do a final call for anyone who wishes to speak to the matter on the floor. If you could please raise your hand in Zoom so that we may call on you.
That would be great.
Again, one final call. Should anyone wish to speak to the matter on the floor, please raise your hand in Zoom. And we do not have any further hands, Mr. Chair.
Great. I will now go back to the committee. If there are any questions, further questions from the committee, that would be great. And then we'll have a mover and a seconder. And yes, Madam Clerk.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to check to make sure that staff didn't have anything further to add from some of the questions.
Thank you. Ms. Grant. Sorry,
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, no problem. I know you're tired. I will try to respond to some of the questions, and some of the final questions I will ask the UPO representatives on the line today to speak about their business practice specifically. But I'm just going to go through my list, and if there's anything I missed, my colleagues are on the line too, so they can notify me of that. So First, speaking to the comments about being a mile from the 401, through circulation of this application, the Ministry of Transportation was circulated and they didn't have objections to this application. They have some requirements related to the site plan control stage, so that's something that would be addressed then. I'm not sure what the previous guidance was related to that 1 mile distance, but it's not something that has been flagged by the ministry at this point. There were some comments about existing rec yards elsewhere in the city and potential implications on their business models. The scope of the Planning Act applications is land use for this subject property, so we cannot take into consideration independent business models. So that's our response to this comment. We would just look at the official plan and provincial plan policies related to the land use and compatibility on the specific site. Related to traffic to this site, as I mentioned, traffic staff have reviewed this application and they don't have concerns related to the amount of traffic it would create on the site, especially in comparison to the drive-in movie theater that was there before. But that is definitely something that they will be monitoring. And if there are any issues in the future in terms of road capacity, that's something that staff would be looking at. There was mention about car stacking, and I believe the comment was more related to that's not the practice anymore to stack cars. And so, yes, I just wanted to reiterate that there is a limitation in the zoning related to how high any open storage can be in the yard, so that stacking of cars wouldn't be permitted in like a 5-high kind of manner. There were comments about the crusher not being a noise concern, and yeah, just wanted to reiterate that the noise study has been completed for that crusher. There were comments from Mr. Gibson related to further concerns about decontamination and existing fluids that may be left in lines. So that's certainly something that would be looked at through the detailed risk management plan. That would be reviewed by the CRCA, and that's definitely something that I will reiterate with them and making sure that we're taking a close look at kind of leftover fluids that are left in the car even after they may be depolluted. So that's something I will flag with the CRCA to ensure that that's something that's incorporated into that risk management plan. Further, the ministry will also be requiring stormwater management and quality control approvals, which would be enforced by the ministry, and any contravention of those plans would be enforceable by the ministry. I wanted to allow Kenny Upol's representative to speak to how they deal with leftover fluids in the line. So I believe we have Christian on the line as well as Tracy. So I'll give them a second and see if they wanted to speak to that.
Yeah, it's Christian. Sorry, I'm in my car. It's Christian from Kenny Upol. I can answer any question you have.
Yes, the question was regarding how you managed to get all of the fluids out of the lines and such to make sure that when amateurs go on site to remove items, that there aren't leaks of fluids.
We use a new technology which is called SEDA. It comes from Europe, and the fluid are vacuum. We have 7 fluids: brake, anti-gel, gas, good gas. We vacuum it from it's equipment. I think you have the picture. Is a SEDA. Just to let you know, we have more than 25 yards with Kenny Upol. We have in Ontario, we have in Quebec, we have in Maritime, in the Maine. We always respect all the criteria that for environmental things, we get inspected for all the MOE, all the city. We test our water. We make inspections for the stormwater management. As the previous say, we are huge. We are a big company, so we don't try to cut corner to save 25 cents. We invest the money that we have to invest. We have procedure. We have a manual of maintenance, manual of operation. We train our people. We have site manager. We have a regional director. We have director. we like the Tim Hortons of the scrapyard. We own many. We have, I think now 3,000 or 4,000 employees. So we have big processor. We have a step in case of spillage. We have a processor. We remove the dirt. We just want to reassure you that we're big. We have many sites. We are sometimes a site in St. John near a river, and we have no complaint with that. And I hope that reassure you.
Thank you for that response. Is there anybody else that would like to address any of the comments that were made by the public? Seeing none. Am I missing anything, Madam Clerk?
No, Mr. Chair, I don't see any hands.
Okay, we'll go back to the committee. And what I will request, unless there's something glaringly on your mind that you haven't spoken yet, if we can have a mover and a seconder, then we will have an opportunity to speak to this. And I will then, after the committee speaks to it, I'll recognize our visiting councillors. Moved by Councillor Hill, seconded by Councillor Rosanek. So it's now on the floor. Any comments from members of the committee? Yes, Councillor Hutchins.
Okay. To me, the most important thing is the, I mean, it's clear that a number of changes and improvements have taken place with the application. The part that really concerns me as of yet is the dealing with the contamination fluids. And we just got a description of the type of technology they might be using. So my question is, just to be sure to staff, is that my understanding from what was said that this issue will come up again under site plan control, under the risk management plan.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so if this was to be approved at this stage tonight, would this issue, if the response of site plan control is in the risk management plan not satisfactory, is the city able to block this development at that point?
Thank you, and through you. So the CRCA would be requesting that plan to be approved by them as part of the site plan control process. So if it was to be bumped up, that's something that members of the public or council could certainly comment on, and the CRCA would take that into account in terms of their review of that risk management document.
So they would have to issue a permit. I mean, that's not news. I'm just ascertaining that that is what's going to happen here. And other than the CRCA, well, what is at site plan control, what is the powers of the city in such a case?
Mr. Park.
Through you, Mr. Chair, in order to get the building permits necessary to undertake the construction for this facility, they have to get site plan approval. So if they don't meet the conditions and the requirements of the site plan requirements, in other words, getting all the approvals, that agreement is not is not executed by the city. Therefore, they can't pull their building permits.
Okay, so
and I believe Mr. Barr had his hand up as
sure,
well
sure,
to address that. Thank you.
Thank you. And just in addition to that as well, through you, Chair, There is a hold on the zone, which specifies a number of items that have to be addressed, one of which is site plan control, the second of which is a hydrogeological report. Third is all approvals have to be sought and obtained from the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks for the stormwater works on site, part of which will be the consideration of the contaminant control on site. So even before we can move towards that issuance of a building permit or works on site, all of these criteria have to be met. So there are two mechanisms here which are regulating the development. One is site plan control, but two is the removal of the holding symbol. So both of those will adequately capture all of the additional requirements that are needed for this development.
Thank you.
Okay. If I can just continue my.
Yes, the floor is yours.
So this is far from over. That's what I gathered from this. And so one of the claims made earlier was about pollution of the CRCA land that could result from this development. And I wonder what staff's response is to that. It is downhill, I can see that. I've been out there quite often. So I'm wondering what staff's response is to that. It wasn't specifically addressed, so I'm asking you.
Yes, Ms. Grant.
Yeah, thank you, and through you. So the CRCA did review that in their review of this application because there are mapped heritage features within those CRCA lands, obviously, based on the separation between the site and the CRCA lands with both Mcadoo's Lane and Perth Road or Division. The way that the stormwater flows from the site into the city's infrastructure system in the road with the quality control measures, they did not raise concerns about potential impacts to the Conservation Authority lands.
Okay. And just to ascertain something else, the an important part of staff's argument in suggesting approval here is that they wanted to have, they feel that we should try to consolidate waste management sites pretty much in one area. And did I understand that correctly? And that's one of the reasons for, one of the many reasons for approving this.
Ms. Grant.
Yes, thank you, and through you. So yes, that is what the official plan directs us to do very clearly, is to cluster waste management industrial uses in limited areas, not necessarily one area, but definitely limited areas in the rural area. And this Mcadoos Lane currently represents the largest cluster that we have.
Okay, given that waste is inevitable and which cars are one part, are there options? I mean, clearly this kind of business has to take place. In fact, we heard from somebody else who does it only for trucks. So what are the options to the city for waste management of this sort?
Who would like to address that? Mr. Bauer.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. The city has a number of waste management sites that are existing today. One of them being in the Clyde Industrial Park on John Counter Boulevard, located within the urban boundary. These lands are commonly known as the Kimco Steel property. So that is a waste management facility located within the urban boundary. Outside the urban boundary, there is a cluster of waste management industrial sites on the north side of Mcadoo's Lane. The establishment of new waste management facilities is guided by our official plan, which outlines that these have to be considered through an official plan amendment process, subject to all of the applicable policies and criteria of both the province and the municipality. So when we're thinking about the establishment of new uses in the city, this is really an applicant-led process. When someone comes to the city with an idea about what they want to do, it has to be considered through the lens of the city's policy. We don't have any pre-designated waste management areas located throughout the city. So these are considered on a proposed basis.
Thank you.
Right. Do we have any rules in the well, in the zoning or in the official plan regarding gradients relative to other properties and waterways?
Through you, Chair. Point of clarification, what do you mean by gradient, Councillor Hutchison?
Well, in this case, it's a point being made repeatedly about height relative to what is around it. Like CRCA is to the west and there's other lands to the south. And I think this is what concerns people, at least initially, when they're talking about water contamination. So I know it's being addressed. We heard about that. But I'm just wondering if we had any general policies on, you know, it would be better if it was flat, I guess. I don't know where you're going to find that in Kingston, but, you know, so do we take that into account? In some way we must. So if you could just clarify that, please.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. There is a hydrogeological report that's going to have to be submitted as part of the removal of hold application. That's going to examine the on-site servicing, so water and wastewater purposes. But when we're thinking about the redevelopment of this site, the site is proposed to be regraded in such a manner that the contaminants are all, or not contaminants, the stormwater is all directed towards the one stormwater management pond on the site and then fed through the city system after it's gone through its processes to capture any sort of runoff that might be captured by the stormwater that's flowing towards those systems. So it's not unlike when we're looking at the development of a new subdivision or a new site. It has to be graded in a manner so the stormwater that's falling on that site doesn't negatively impact adjacent surrounding uses. So the site has to deal with its own stormwater management before it can be directed towards the city system in a responsible manner. Even though this land might be considered higher than other mechanisms or higher than other properties around it, there are mechanisms in place in order to ensure that the stormwater doesn't spill over and out onto adjacent properties. And that is part of the review of site plan control. And we look at items like grading, ditching, and any other stormwater management features through that detailed review.
Okay, and based on my previous question that Mr. Park answered, my understanding is that, and Mr. Barr, my understanding is that if they don't meet these tests, like the risk management plan, the hydrogeologist report, the holding symbol will not be lifted and this could be stopped at that point. Again, just to be really clear, is that correct?
Through your chair, yes, that is correct. So staff have to be satisfied that all of the submitted criteria for site plan control as well as the hold removal are met before such time that a site plan control agreement is executed and a hold is removed from the subject zone.
And that will come to, does it come after it goes through the planning tests, let's call them, and it comes to council if it is deemed worthy of approval, then it will come to council. Yeah, or I don't believe it'll come back to planning. Is that correct?
Through you, Chair, site plan control and hold removals are a more delegated authority application. So if there is a desire to have the site plan control bumped up, the site plan control application would come back to planning committee for consideration.
Okay, so the bump up will come through. So that's something the councillor can do, the local councillor.
That's correct. I don't believe it's just limited to the local councillor, but council has the ability to bump up an application.
No, I realize that. Usually it's the local councillor, and it sounds to me like that's quite possibly what will happen here. Okay, thank you. I'm done now.
Thank you very much. Any other member of the committee like to speak to this application? Seeing none. Oh, everybody wants to go last. Councillor Rosanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Approving this is too risky. If we were on flat land with a clay soil, you know, that would be better. Or if it was in the urban area where residents are not reliant on groundwater and, you know, for their wells, that would be better too. We all received a letter today by email at 2:27 p.m. I feel his concerns are very valid. It's risky. There could be contamination. And then what do we do? It's the risk. And I'm not willing to take that risk. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments from the committee? Seeing none, could you take the chair? I believe Councillor Rosanna. It keeps confusing me. Who's the
Okay,
vice?
yes, I'll take the chair and stick with it this time. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Two questions. One, if this gets approved and the province does the approval and the city does the approval, is there an opportunity, or can we expect that the province or CRCA will come back periodically to assure that serious pollution isn't happening? Or will this be a kind of snapshot recognition that it's okay? What's our opportunity to revisit?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's a good question. I know that they will have plans that they will be required to comply with both the ministry and the CRCA. So those would be enforcement based if they are in contravention of those plans. I'm not sure if the CRCA does active reporting of properties that are in compliance with their requirements, but that's certainly something that I can touch base with CRCA staff with to see if there's any opportunity to do ongoing monitoring in that way.
Yeah, I see Mr. Park has raised his hand. I'm sorry. I'm no longer the chair. It's been a long day.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. For any of the processes on the site that require provincial licensing, in order to get those renewed, my understanding is that there is testing that is done during the renewal, as is the case for similar operations currently on Mcadoo's Lane, where the province does come out and do inspections prior to renewing their license. Thank you.
Thank you. My final question, and I apologize if this was in the report. It was a very detailed report, and I've had 3 very tiring days. So what is the anticipated number of employees that this site will have when it's fully operational?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't have that number off the top of my head. I believe it was somewhere in the range of 15, but I know Christian and Tracy are on the line, so I will ask them to provide details about the anticipated number of employees.
Okay, the number of employees for the Kinney side will be at about 30 with the weekends and the part-time, full-time, and on AIM side will be probably 15.
Thank you. Those were my only questions. So.
Okay, I return the chair to you.
Thank you very much. Before I call the question, I will give Councillor Oosterhoff and Councillor Chappelle an opportunity to speak to this. Yes, Councillor Oosterhoff. And you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we did hear that there was a possibility of some data issues on traffic. Is that a concern at all? The road capacity is already very, very heavy. And I'm wondering if the city recognizes a potential investment on the roads with considerable more traffic, certainly beyond the 2 vehicles a day. Can anybody comment on that?
Yes, who would like to speak to that? Yes, Ms. Grant.
Thank you, and through you. Yes, so the applicants have submitted their estimated number of truck traffic to the site per day based on operations at their previous site, which they have estimated to be about 2 trucks per day. We imagine there would be some fluctuation in that depending on busy times of year and those types of things. Transportation staff haven't raised any concerns related to increased traffic on this road, especially during daytime hours for this type of use. The anticipated traffic from one business isn't such that it would require upgrades to the existing road system, and the road is already quite close to the 401, and this property is on the end corner of that road. So we don't have any concerns with traffic at this application.
Okay, thank you for that. So yeah, I guess I just want to reiterate to Mr. Chair that I am asking the committee to not approve of this recommendation from planning. I think we have heard enough tonight, and again, it's a very respectable development. I never meant any negative on that, but I think that we have seen, and we know in our hearts that this is a poor location. This is a poor use of land planning, and I think we need the courage to say no to this tonight. The risk is that the south side of Mcadoo Lane will now be, the rest of Mcadoo Lane will now be undeveloped for the long term, even longer than the past, and that is sad to me. Planning is about impacts on an area, impacts on a region, on a people, on a community, on an economy, and on an ecosystem, on our climate, and impact on the future. And when you consider that for this development, it's all negative. I believe that the failure of the planning and the official plan actually rests on council, for which we are all part of. I believe we have failed to do the adequate heavy lifting when it comes to what is required for the planning of the rural area of Kingston. And putting a pause, putting a hold, doing a secondary review, which we as planning, you as planning committee can have influence over. This development recommendation is another song played poorly, and I am asking that we not record it tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chappelle. And then I'll give staff an opportunity to answer any questions that arise from both councillors.
Yes, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I do have a couple additional comments. One thing that I was troubled, I went back and looked at the map, and it says that they have to be at least 70 meters from the site for the nearest neighbor. And but when you look at the picture, it's 70 meters to the residence, but not to the property line. I mean, they say it's 80 meters to the property line. So there's potential for well contamination, especially if it's going down slope. The other issue I have is, since this company is so large, they obviously must have had risk mitigation plans available at one of their many other sites from across North America. What has the planning committee had an opportunity to review one of these risk mitigation plans? If so, why wasn't it shared with council to see what the risk mitigation would be if someone did inadvertently spill from some Joe Hack garage wannabe guy, or some young teenager like I was at the time, hanging out in junkyards, ripping things apart and making a mess? How does that get triggered? How does it get noticed that there's somebody who drops some brake fluid that's leaching now through the gravel? And do they really remove the gravel, treat it, and put it back? I don't believe it. So the other aspect is, I've mentioned this many times about the concerns that I have with the type of substrate that we have in Kingston, especially north of 401, where the soil layer is so thin over top of limestone that when we have rain and rain events, which I wish Councillor Kiley was here tonight because I had a speech prepared for him, that we get flash flooding and that water does not absorb into the ground. It just runs off and it carries with it those fluids, and those fluids can travel. And our wastewater system, as it's described by planning, is only a collection service. Actually, when you talk to Mr. Keach, it does not filter through for vehicular fluids. It doesn't treat that. That ends up going into our environment, possibly into Lake Ontario, possibly hanging out in the Inner Harbor. Who knows? So I am very, very concerned about water quality in rural areas. I happen to, unless you've lived with a property on a well, you don't appreciate the significance of that. If this site was within the urban boundary, I don't think it would have such an issue, because at least if there was a fire, you would have fire protective services to address this. We didn't talk about tires tonight, where they're storing the tires. I worked at Queen's Park when Hagersville was there, and it was a mess. And all the benzene that leached into the water, well, now we have an incredible potential catastrophe. And I'd like to thank Mr. Morgan for his presentation, because I am familiar with his site and he has a fantastic business. So thank you for speaking up tonight. But I want to say something. You know, we talked, it wasn't until we was flagged tonight about St. John. So I looked up St. John auto dealers, and there's AIM president blast St. John's city leaders in the province at a public meeting. The company has been a catalyst for complaints about noise, dust, pollution, and a series of explosions. Billionaire president, American Iron and Metal, put on a combative performance at public meeting at St. John on Wednesday. Herb Black hosted an event to defend his embattled scrap recycling operation, which has been a spotlight over the past few years. The scrapyard has been a catalyst of noise, dust, and pollution complaints from neighbors in the city's lower west side on the Central Peninsula. But the 75-year-old Black had little time and apologies when he addressed the public. Seriously, folks, wake up and see, and tell me what you really want, he said. Why you don't want a scrapyard here? You don't want action, you don't want jobs. And he likened the impact of the St. John plant to a visit from a cruise ship with attendant taxis and crowds in the streets of Uptown. This is not the type of relationship I want with a civic employer. Take the American job and bring it south of the border. I'm not interested. Please vote no against this horrendous proposal.
Great. Any comments from members of the members of staff to the last two speakers? Yes, Ms. Grant.
Thank you, and through you. I think Councillor Oosterhoff, I think I had responded to his question related to traffic, and the remainder of his comments were directed towards committee. Councillor, not if I'm correct. I don't think there was any questions specific for staff. Okay, perfect. Just want to make sure I didn't skip anything from either. Related to Councillor Chappelle's questions, the map does provide a 70-meter buffering from the property line of the residential dwelling. The information about the 85 meters to the actual location of the dwelling was just provided for context as part of the presentation. Related to council seeing a specific risk mitigation plan, the company did provide their standard management practices for depollution of cars, but of course each of those plans need to be done on a site-specific basis based on the site context and grading and all those things we've discussed today. So that will be shared if the application is bumped up. That will be shared through that process for council to review. The comments about other sites in St. John's, I won't necessarily comment on those because that's not the application that we're reviewing tonight. So I don't think that there's anything from staff there to respond to, but I will give a minute for Mr. Barr and Mr. Park to step in if they have any additional comments on that.
Thank you. Seeing none, I did see Councillor Hill was waving at me a second ago. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I'm really surprised at what I'm hearing tonight. Like, you know, we asked the CRCA their opinion. We asked the Ministry of the Environment their opinion. Both of them have approved this project. We have a risk management strategy that has to be approved before this thing goes forward. We already have a number of these businesses that are have been in operation in that area for a number of years, and none of the concerns that have been expressed by some of my colleagues are in evidence. I think what this amounts to is a business that we don't like, or some of us don't like. And I mean, obviously, I think we want to see the kind of clustering that was described in terms of these sorts of operations. That just makes sense. You don't want them scattered throughout the countryside district. So I'm really struggling with sort of substituting our expertise as councillors for the expertise that we've already received from people who are actually experts and who work in the field and who've given their approval for this project with the conditions that are going to come out of the site plan. So I'm discouraged to hear some of the comments that I've heard tonight, and I see this as a legitimate business. I don't see any evidence here that this business has caused the kinds of problems that are being described in other communities. So I find this a little bit disingenuous at best, to be honest with you tonight. And I will be voting to support this business. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other committee members, although I saw Councillor Hutchison raising his hand. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I just wanted to say I can understand people's apprehensions about this, but I don't. The problem is that we're in a situation where we don't see at this stage all of the evidence that has to be brought to bear in terms of risk management and the Ministry of Environment, I believe, and so on. We haven't got it all, but there is a process for receiving. And I just don't, I believe that what I was trying to establish before is that if a bump up takes place, it will come back to planning and we'll have another look at it. And I want staff to, again, unfortunately, I feel compelled to ask staff if that in fact will be the case if there's a bump up.
Yes, Mr. Barr.
I believe Mr. Park, I'll speak anyways. Yes, that is correct, Councillor, that if this was bumped up, it would come back to Planning Committee for consideration.
Okay, so this is approved, and Councillor Ustroff brings the bump up. I would gladly second it. Because I do think we need to know more, but the process allows us to know more. And so I think we should afford ourselves that consideration. And because I do think there's been, like, compared to what we saw in the beginning, staff have negotiated or insisted on a large number of improvements from everything, the planting strip, the berm, the separation of uses, you know, and this is tough when people are talking about their water source, but it appears to me that often these things can be done successfully and have been done in the past, not only in Kingston, but in other places. So I'm looking to see how this all comes together. So I will support it at this level, at this time. And those are my reasons why. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sanik, would you take the chair very briefly for just one comment?
Sure. Yep.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
As I understand it, and staff don't have to correct me, if I say anything wrong here. But as I understand it, there will be a hold on this. There's many of the concerns expressed are site plan concerns, and a bump up would allow us to see all of those, and the hold won't be lifted until those professional organizations that can vet this, such as CRCA and the provincial government, have an opportunity to do so. Is that accurate? So we do have safeguards? Ms. Grant. Oh, sorry, I keep doing that.
Ms. Grants.
Hi, Mr. Chair. Yes, you've outlined it correctly there.
Great. Given the fact that we have that opportunity to review this, I will be supporting it as well. If you can return the chair, I have a quick question for the clerk.
I return the chair.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, have we fulfilled the obligation to give the public an opportunity to speak, or should we do one more round?
Mr. Chair, members of the public have had an opportunity to speak to the application, and we have already moved the motion on the floor, so it would be only committee members at this time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So I will call the question that's now on the floor. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. So I will declare this portion of our meeting complete, and we'll now return to the Knack Street application concerning the former high school. Who would like to speak to that or present that?
Mr. Chair, through you. So Ms. Grant is the planner on the file. There is a presentation available to the committee. It would be up to them whether they wish the staff planner to go through another presentation or if they feel they have received enough information through the public meeting.
I see one thumbs up. I see two thumbs up. Who would like another information? I'm seeing a lot of nods. So we will ask for a mover and a shaker to put this on the floor.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, before we move and second it, because it is a business item, we do need to go quickly over to members of the public in case there is any additional comments to be received.
I'm sorry, trying to rush us all off the screen here. So I'll put it in your hands if you want to recognize anybody who raises their hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do still have two members of the public with us. I will just offer again an opportunity for those who wish to speak to please raise their hand in Zoom with regards to the current application at 235 Frontenac Street. And there are no hands, Mr. Chair, so we can move forward.
Thank you. I believe we already moved and seconded this, so seeing no further comments on that. Did I move it? Did somebody move it?
I'm so sorry, Mr. Chair. You did, and I interrupted you. So unfortunately, we didn't call out a mover and a seconder.
Okay. Mover and a shaker. I believe Councillor Hill and Councillor Bosanek had raised their hands. So any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Thank you. And now our last item is in regards to 303 and 305 Sutherland Drive. And we have a report before us. And I believe Mike is here to speak to it.
Yes, that's right. Just gonna wait for Elizabeth to put on the application or the presentation. I know it's been a long evening and after a long week, so I'll try to be efficient with my presentation here. We can move on to questions. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, and any members of the public who are here this evening. My name is Mike Slaggy, I'm a planner with the City of Kingston, here to present the comprehensive report and staff recommendation for a zoning amendment application for the properties at 303 and 305 Sutherland Drive. The public meeting for this application was held in December of last year. Next slide, please. The purpose and effect of the application is to establish a site-specific A5 zone in order to add semi-detached dwelling as a permitted use on the properties and establish site-specific zone standards related to minimum lot area and lot width, minimum aggregate and minimum side yards, and a minimum parking space length. The ultimate intention being to construct 2 new semi-detached dwellings with future second residential units. Next slide, please. The subject lands, sorry, next slide. Thank you. The subject lands are located on the west side of Sutherland Drive between Keats Place to the north and Conacher Drive to the south in the Markers Acres neighborhood of the city of Kingston. The area nearest to the site is generally characterized by single and semi-detached dwellings ranging from 1 to 2.5 stories. The property is located in close proximity to Markers Acres Park, which you can see in the bottom left of your screen, a number of schools and other institutional uses, and commercial areas along Montreal and Division Streets. The site is also well serviced by Kingston Transit, with bus routes 1, 2, and 7 being located within 150 meters of the site. The site is designated residential in the official plan and zoned 1 and 2 family A5 zone in zoning bylaw 8499. Next slide, please. Here are several photos showing the site and its surroundings. The site itself is vacant and bound to the north and south by single detached dwellings 1.5 stories in height. Further north of the lots at the intersection of Keats Place and Sutherland are single and semi-detached dwellings 1.5 to 2 stories in height. To the west are single detached dwellings 1 to 2.5 stories in height, and to the east are single detached dwellings 1 to 1.5 stories in height. Next slide, please. The proposed development includes the construction of 2 semi-detached dwellings with the intent of establishing second residential units in each of the semi-detached units. Each semi-detached unit would measure approximately 275 square meters, with the primary unit measuring approximately 167 square meters and the second unit measuring approximately 108 square meters. Vehicular access is provided from Sutherland Drive, which will provide access to 2 parking spaces, one for the primary residence in an attached garage, and a second for the secondary unit in the driveway. The majority of the lot will be landscaped open space, which in addition to provided balconies will serve as amenity space for the future residents. The provided balconies are set back at 303 Sutherland, 4.7 meters from the neighboring side lot lines and 4.9 meters from the rear lot lines. And at 305 Sutherland, they are set back 4.3 meters from the side lot lines and 4.9 from the rear lot line. This additional setback at 303 Sutherland is in recognition of the adjacent property's existing amenity space. Improvements made since the initial submission include reducing the widths of the driveways and including access ways to the front entries, where previously an expanded driveway was intended to address both vehicular and pedestrian access. This revised approach reduces the width of the needed curb cut, improving safety for pedestrians, and increases the amount of landscaped area on the site. In addition, 2 trees have been included in the front yard of both semi-detached buildings, which, if you'll recall from the context photos, is more characteristic of the neighborhood and will help integrate the new development with the existing area. Next slide, please. This slide is showing the proposed floor plans for the dwelling at 305 Sutherland, which is effectively identical to 303 Sutherland, except that the entry and garage would be flipped at 303 Sutherland. This is to show the internal configuration where both units would be accessed from a shared front entry and then provide individual entry to the 2 units, where the primary residence would occupy the basement and main floor and contain 4 bedrooms, which are identified in blue, and the second unit occupying the second floor and containing 3 bedrooms identified in red. This amendment would include a limit of 7 bedrooms per lot. Next slide, please. The dwellings will be 2.5 stories in height for a total of 8.2 meters as measured by the zoning bylaw and 9.4 meters to the top of the roof. This is a reduction and improvement from the initial submission where a height of 8.6 meters as per the bylaw and 10.4 meters to the top of the roof was proposed. This amounts to a reduction of 1 meter in the total height of the building. Next slide, please. Prior to this evening's meeting, 9 comment letters have been received throughout the application process. These letters are included in the report Appendix A, as well as the addendum to this evening's report. The concerns raised in these letters, as well as the public meeting include concerns for the density proposed, the proposed height and privacy concerns, traffic and parking, as well as general compatibility with the surrounding neighborhood. These items have been addressed in the report, and I can answer any additional questions that are brought up this evening, but generally speaking, a large number of the concerns relate to items that comply with the existing zoning, such as the size of the building and the proposed parking, or in the case of density, are in line with the policies of the official plan, which support the intensification of stable neighborhoods based on certain conditions, which are achieved here. Next slide, please. To summarize the requested amendments, the applicant is seeking to add semi-detached dwelling as a permitted use, which will be limited to 7 bedrooms per lot, as mentioned earlier. They are also seeking a reduced lot area of 232.3 square meters and a reduced lot width of 7.6 meters to permit severance of the development or of the lots. They are also seeking a reduced minimum aggregate side yard and minimum side yard of 1.2 meters and 0 where a building is attached to reflect the semi-detached nature of the buildings, and a reduced minimum parking space length of 5.7 meters for the space located in the attached garage. Next slide, please. 2 other applications have been submitted in relation to this application, those being the 2 consent applications to sever the properties if this zoning amendment is approved. Next slide, please. It is the department's view that the proposed development is appropriate and adds to the range of built form and dwelling unit sizes available in the area. The proposal contributes to increasing the total residential density within the urban boundary in an area with a variety of existing amenities and services that support daily life and where no undue adverse negative impacts are anticipated. The proposed amendment complies with the provincial policy statement and official plan and constitutes good land use planning. As such, staff recommend approval of this application for zoning bylaw amendment. Next slide, please. If this application is approved, the applicant will advance to submitting for building permits and finalize the consent applications in order to sever the property. Thank you, and I can answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. You are a good speed reader. I appreciate that.
I had some time to practice.
So I will turn to the committee, and I believe the councillor for the district is here as well. So we'll give the committee members an opportunity to ask questions, make comments, and then if any other councillor wishes to speak, we'll give them an opportunity. So any questions or comments? Seeing none, I will give Councillor Holland, did you have any comments or questions? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, a question. So I think we discussed this back at the public meeting, but I'm just trying to make something, I guess, a bit clearer than what I found in the report regarding the development of the secondary units. So it says that there will be 2, but then there's also a reference early in the report to future or developing potential future secondary units in these dwellings. And I'm wondering if that wording refers to the development of the secondary units, the first 2 that are proposed, or if there are further ones that if there is a potential for further development of secondary units here.
Go ahead, I recognize you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. No, just to clarify, the intent has always been that they would construct the 2 semi-detached dwellings, sever the properties to create the 4 lots, build the 2 semi-detached dwellings, and then each of the semi-detached units, so the 4 halves of the buildings, would then have second residential units on the upper story. So there would be 4 second residential units.
Okay, thanks. And then just also to some of the questions regarding privacy that were brought up in the public meeting, the area is really well established around there. The residential area around is all fenced, but the fences are not very high. They're not privacy fences. Just wondering if there's any mitigation proposals that would come up around site plan, for example, to do with privacy, given the density that's proposed for this development.
So with respect to, first, this would not be subject to site plan. However, the application right now includes balconies at the rear of each of the floors. And as per the zoning, each balcony, at least the 2, I guess, to the south, would be blocked by a physical barrier as per the requirement of the zoning bylaw. So the 2 that would be exposed are the ones nearest to, I assume you're speaking for the corner property there. Those would be visible. However, those are within the rights of the applicant to install. They are meeting the zoning requirements and in fact have been pulled back where the zoning does permit them to extend it to within 1.2 meters of the side yard. They are, I believe it was 4.9 meters from the side yard. An initial proposal did include a Juliet balcony at the second story, the tallest one. And I did connect with the applicant prior to this meeting that they would be open to reverting back to that so that there would just be the first floor balconies if that was something that was a concern of planning committee. So that is an option, but right now everything that they're doing is within the provisions of the zoning bylaw.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Could you take the chair, Councillor Rosanek, for one very quick question?
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. Given the potential for the 2 secondary suites and the potential for 2 more, and given that it's semi-detached, can we presume that these will be much more affordable rental units than often happens in Kingston?
Through you, Madam Chair. I don't think I can actually speak to the actual price point of these units. Just speaking theoretically, we are taking 2 lots of record, which would contain 2 single detached dwellings, dividing them in half. So if this were to be an ownership situation, obviously less land, less building to purchase, so it should be more affordable. And then with that, the second residential units are identified as an affordable form of housing, and would obviously add to the range of housing and options in the area. As to specific price points, I don't know if I can actually speak to that, but it would certainly be a more affordable option than if it was simply a single detached dwelling.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I believe Mr. Park has raised a hand.
Yes, Mr. Park.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. Just to add to Mr. Salagi's comments, what this proposal is doing is actually providing a range of 3-bedroom and 4-bedroom units in the affordability range. So it gives us that greater range that we're trying to get, a better mix of units, because as you're aware, committee, we do see a lot of proposals containing mostly 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom. So this gives that greater range of units for the market. Thank you.
Thank you.
I return the chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Zanuck.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have thought of some questions. So knowing that there's going to be so many secondary suites in these 2 semi-detached homes, it kind of rings a bell now of Westbrook Meadows, problems that I've seen at Westbrook Meadows. And I just wondered, when you have a secondary suite, you need 2 exits, right? So one will probably be through the front door, or maybe like the garage door. At Westbrook Meadows, they then have like a fire exit staircase from the 1 floor down to the ground level. Is that what we're going to see in with this development?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm actually not familiar with the secondary exits for this property. I know they will have to go through a building permit and comply with any fire requirements. So if there isn't a secondary fire exit currently and they require one, they will have to install one, either through the balcony or Juliet balconies or some other fashion.
Thank you. Is there a follow-up?
More questions? Yes. So I guess then we don't know if these units are going to be owner occupied, or if they're all going to, like the 28 rooms are all going to be rentals and not owner occupied.
Through you, Mr. Chair. As always, planning doesn't really focus on the type of tenure. In speaking with the applicant, I understand that the intention is, and the severance would corroborate this, that they would intend to sell off the individual units, and then the future owners could then own it and then rent out the basement suite or use it as sort of a granny flat type of situation. There would be a whole slew of options, but the severance would suggest that they will end up selling off the units.
Thank you. Okay, any further questions from the committee? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, are there any members of the public that would like to address this application?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, we do still have one member of the public with us this evening, so we will just give that brief opportunity should they wish to speak to the current application. If you could please raise your hand in Zoom so that we may call on you. I'll just give a couple of seconds here, Mr. Chair, to make sure. And they are not raising their hand, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Sanik.
Thank you. Through you, just another question to staff. So I know on Conacher, we have some affordable housing units closer to Division Street, right? Which would be, I think, medium density. And I think we read in this report that the density that's being recommended with these 28 rooms does actually put this application in the medium density category. So looking at this area like Sutherland and Moran's Crescent and Keats Place and whatever other street names are on this north side area and even on the south side area other than the Frontenac housing units. Are there any other, is there another cluster? I call this application a cluster since it's like 28 rooms. Is there another cluster that's medium density in that subdivision area?
Through you, Mr. Chair. First, I do just want to clarify that the density is measured by the number of units, not the bedrooms. So it was the 4 units over the 2 properties, and that's how they got to their 43 dwelling units per net hectare. In terms of medium density, I have not done a survey to see exactly what densities exist around the area in general. However, one thing that I think is important to note is the characteristic of the neighborhood as a whole is the variety of housing types available. Certainly, I described the ones that are nearest to the property, but even south along Conacher, you have far more semi-detached dwellings, as well as row houses and low-rise apartments. To the northeast of the property, across from the primary school, there are low-rise apartment buildings. Southeast, there are additional, there's a large number of semi-detached dwellings as well. So I haven't done the calculations to know the exact densities, but just speaks to the variety of housing options and available in the neighborhood.
Thank you. Seeing no further hands up, I will entertain a mover and a seconder for moved by Councillor Hill and seconded by Councillor Osanek. If there are no further comments or questions, I will call the question. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. And I believe, Madam Clerk, we've completed all of the action items on tonight's agenda. So we have no motions. We have no notices of motion. We have, I presume, no other business. There is a correspondence that we've received as well as the addendum tonight. And the date of the next meeting is November 18th at 6 p.m. So I now owe the staff something because I promised I'd owe everybody a beer if they got me to bed by 10 o'clock tonight. And I think that has happened. Thank you very much. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Sanek, Councillor Hill, all those in favor? Carried. Thank you very much, everybody.